Richard Salm here with Richard Moses of the Lower East Side Preservation Initiative. All right, got that right. Cool. All right. Now tell me, there's so much history underneath our feet and everywhere around us. And you're one of the few people who are smart enough and brave enough to see the vision of the future that history needs to be preserved.
Well, everywhere we look, as you said, is history all around us. And both the buildings themselves tell stories in stone, they tell stories in brick, in terracotta of the craftsmen that built them. The people who lived in the buildings all had their own stories, starting 150 years ago with the first waves of immigration and going right up through the present with the present waves of immigration. It's all one continuum as part of New York City history, and it's an amazing story that needs to be preserved so that future generations will understand it.
Now, why did people come to the Lower East Side as opposed to any other place? What was it about here? What was the magnet?
It was cheap. It was an inexpensive place to live, and there was a lot of work around. There was kind of a synergy between all of the groups that were coming in from all around the world and within the groups themselves. So the people who came over tended to be very motivated, just as people have always been motivated when they've come to this country. And that motivation produces a lot of energy, produces a lot of work, and a lot of culture.
What are the oldest known surviving buildings still around in the Lower East Side?
Oh, that's a tough question. There's a church, I believe, from the early 18th century. Unfortunately, of course, I can't think of the name right now.
Where's it located?
It's down near Chinatown, a little bit on the east side of Chinatown. And it's a stone building, actually, that went through a couple of conversions, but it's still very recognizable as one of the very early churches. Also in Chinatown, there's a very early federal house, I believe from about 1780 or 1790.
Right.
Of course, I've forgotten the name of that house.
Federal Hall?
No.
No, okay. No. That's it. Anyway, so what is unique about the challenges that you face in trying to preserve history?
Well, the biggest challenge is that there's a lot of money to be made, of course, demolishing buildings and putting up new buildings. And unfortunately, there's even more money to be made putting up new buildings where the architecture is kind of an afterthought. But what really needs to happen is there needs to be a focus on New York as an urban center where people live here, they visit here, they work here, and they want to be part of a great urban environment. And to be part of a great urban environment, you need great buildings, you need great streets, as well as great people.
But isn't there an economic value to the history as well? Isn't that what brings tourism? Isn't that what sells walking tours and bus tours and things like that, where people do walkthroughs of buildings like the Tenement Museum and places like that?
Absolutely, and tourism, I believe, has now surpassed. If I have this correctly, it's now surpassed Wall Street as an industry for the city. That's just a cash cow. But unfortunately, when you have a property owner, if you lose one building, the tourists still come. If you lose two buildings because the neighbor's gone down, the tourists still come. At a certain point, though, the tourists stop coming when X number of buildings have come down, and you have really what ends up to be a generic street that could be anywhere in the country, built at any time.
What efforts are being done today to save what we still have left? And I remember you said something in pre-production where you said that we're one of the top 11 most endangered historic places on some register.
Right. We were listed by the National Trust for Historic Preservation in 2008 as one of the 11 most endangered historic places in America. And since 2008, unfortunately, we've even lost more historic buildings since that time, so we're actually more endangered now. But there's a lot being done. Our group, of course, Lower East Side Preservation Initiative, other groups we're allied with to try to push forward with city protection for the most historic intact areas. we're not against modern architecture, we're not against new design, we're not against modern buildings, but the areas that are intact that still speak to us of the city's past, and we happen to be standing in front of a pretty decent one right now, these are the areas that deserve to be preserved.
Well, let's look across the street. That looks like a fairly old building right there. That looks like an old tenement.
Yes, exactly.
You know,
that's probably from the 1890s, maybe around 1900. And that would have housed several families and still houses several families. It still performs the function. The crowded conditions that the early families experienced, especially when you had large families living in small apartments, is not something that anyone wants to replicate these days. And very often these buildings, even though this one you can see has some wonderful ornamentation, angels with wreaths around them and pedimented window surrounds, we don't necessarily want to preserve the interiors of most of these buildings. The interiors can often be reworked fairly easily to meet modern comfort and light standards.
Plus, there's nothing like sleeping on a fire escape in the summer.
Yeah, I'm not sure how the city feels about that, but in theory, yes, absolutely.
So what's going on now? And do you have a website? Are there petitions that you're doing? Talk about that.
Yes, we have a website, www.lespi, which is LESPI-NYC.org. We have a Facebook page where we post little tidbits about preservation news, history, related goings-on in the Lower East Side. We have started a petition for the Lower East Side. We had previously done one for the East Village Historic Districts that were passed 2 years ago. We collected more than 1,200 signatures for preservation in the East Village, took them to the Landmarks Commission. The Landmarks Commission took that very seriously and ended up landmarking close to 400 buildings altogether in the East Village 2 years ago. We want them to look at the area below Houston Street, which has a related but very different history from the East Village. Of course, the East Village and the Lower East Side below Houston Street were all initially called the Lower East Side of Manhattan. But the area below Houston, as we heard from Marcia tonight, was an area populated primarily by Jewish people from Greece, from Russia, and various other locations. And so this is an area that speaks very much to Jewish American history.
What could people do to get involved and to help out and volunteer and things like that? And if you are a volunteer, what actually does that comprise?
Well, we're all volunteers at LESPI, and we just give our time, out of the love of the cause, and we're always.
No, what would you do as a volunteer? Is what I'm saying.
What do we do?
Go to the city, organize petitions. Like what do the volunteers actually get to do?
Well, the volunteers, the first order of business, I guess, is to come to meetings, which is not the most exciting part of volunteering. But we have monthly meetings, and then we plan events. Like tonight's event had to be planned. We had to get the invitations out. We had to collect the names of the people attending, have Marcia provide the talk. We give these kind of events and talks periodically. So we had one on Italian-American immigration. We had one on Klein Deutschland, Little Germany in the East Village. So we have various cultural lectures. And we also have various walking tours at different times to show people the history. Those are we organize. And we're out petitioning. We're out talking to people about the importance of preservation, and then we meet with our elected officials. We meet with the council people, we meet with the New York City Landmarks Commission, and we meet even with state senators and state assembly peoples to tell them how important this is to the community and get them behind our effort. And with the East Village districts, they were very solidly behind that landmarking, and we're expecting that they'll be behind our efforts for the Lower East Side below Houston Street as well.
Could you tell me about the building that we're in now that houses the Preservation Initiative?
Yes, this is the Neighborhood Preservation Center on East 11th Street, and it was originally built as the rectory for St. Mark's Church. And I believe that it was designed by the noted architect Ernest Flagg in around 1910 or so. So it has its own very interesting history. We're very lucky to be here with other preservation groups and other kind of similar not-for-profit groups as a home base. And it's interesting because the interiors of the building are also very much intact, fireplaces and moldings. So it's really a very kind of inspirational place for us to meet.
Have you guys done any archaeology around the area or seen anything or unearthed anything that was kind of cool?
We don't get involved in archaeology so much because our mission is really historic district designation, but we're aware of archaeology that happens around the neighborhood, and I know they just found what they believe to be, I think it's the Bull's Head Tavern, which is one of the oldest taverns that George Washington had stopped in down in Chinatown recently off of the Bowery. And so I think they're not 100% sure it's the Bull's Head, but they believe it was. Later it had been turned into a very famous beer garden, so there's a lot of drinking history involved there.
Now, do you have like do you have any exhibits or museum things that you participate with or coordinate other than like lectures?
Not really, not at this point. I mean, we would always welcome anyone who has those kind of skills to organize something like that. It doesn't seem to be something that we have a huge amount of experience with, but it would be something we would love to get more involved in. I think it would be very valuable.
Right. And talk, on the website, are there archives or archives planned in the future for pictures and things like that?
Yes, it's funny. We're just in the very early stages of planning photographs from various families going back over the decades. And we have a few collected so far, actually, some of them friends of my father's, whose families were in the East Village and the Lower East Side back in the 40s and 50s. And we would love to get a critical mass where we could put together an archive, but we feel that we need enough photographs in the collection, to make it someplace that people are going to visit. So we would welcome talking to people, at least preliminarily, who may have family photographs that they wouldn't mind sharing digital versions of the photographs, of course. We wouldn't ask for any original photographs, but that could hopefully within the next year or so become part of an online archive that would do even a better story of telling the history of the Lower East Side than just the outsides of the buildings.
And last question, what is your connection to the Lower East Side? Did you grow up here? Did you live here?
My connection is that my most distant connection was that my great-grandmother lived in the Lower East Side. She came over as a 16-year-old from the Ukraine by herself to escape the Russian pogroms.
Wow.
And she came to live with an uncle. She lived in a girdle factory. She worked in a girdle factory, and she ended up opening up her own little girdle factory in Brooklyn when she moved out there in the late 20s. So the crash, of course, came along, and that changed everything for everybody. But she had a very kind of almost, I would say, probably not untypical story for people who moved there at the turn of the 20th century. She
had a lot of guts to be a 16-year-old travel alone.
Absolutely.
That is real guts.
Yeah. But I think that her family in the Ukraine felt that there was really no choice. They had to get her out, so she left. And from our understanding, she did have an uncle here that she knew that she could stay with. So, but it was interesting because it wasn't a history that she wanted to speak about when I knew her, because she was alive until I was 16, and I would ask her about her experiences, and she really did not want to speak about it. So it must have been very, very difficult for her.
So how did you learn about it? Through other people in the family? Or?
Yes.
I noticed that certain people, when they're older, really just don't talk about the past because they really wanted to leave it behind.
Right, exactly. So, but it's always fascinated me. And then I've lived in New York for the last 30 years and have been coming to the area for the last 30 years, and I've just always loved it because of its diversity, its vitality, and these amazing stories that that the neighborhood just radiates.
Well, I really appreciate your time on the radio. I hope we wish you good success in your initiative. And again, your website is
www.lespi, which is LESPI -NYC All
right, Richard Solomon, thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard.
Thank you.
Whoa!